Ibrahim was a revered Islamic scholar in Istanbul, known for his unwavering faith and devotion to studying the Quran and Hadith. His days were filled with teaching at the local madrasa, leading prayers, and counseling his community on matters of faith. Despite his wisdom, Ibrahim harbored a deep fear of death and uncertainty about the afterlife. In public, he confidently taught about the Garden of Bliss and the punishments of Jahannam, but privately, he often wondered if his deeds would truly be enough. His wife Amina noticed his unease but never pressed him. Life went on in its steady rhythm until one fateful day, everything changed. This is the story of a man who confronted his deepest fears and returned with a message that would shake his faith to its very core. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. My name is Ibrahim, and I was a man who thought I understood the meaning of faith, but everything I believed was challenged on the day I died. It was a humid summer afternoon, and I was walking to the mosque for duur prayers. As I crossed the street, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, a pain so intense that it dropped me to my knees. Everything around me blurred, and I could hear faint voices shouting, "Call for help!" But before I could comprehend what was happening, the world around me faded to black. I don't know how much time passed, but suddenly, I was standing in a place unlike anything I'd ever seen. The air felt alive with a presence, both terrifying and beautiful. At first, I thought I was in Jannah, paradise, but there was an overwhelming sense of judgment, not peace. A brilliant light appeared before me, and I instinctively bowed my head. But this wasn't the light of Allah as I had imagined it. This was a presence so vast and incomprehensible that it stripped me of all pretense. It wasn't just judging my deeds, it was exposing my heart. I saw every time I'd judged others harshly, every moment I'd let pride creep into my faith, and every time I'd recited verses without truly understanding their depth. This can't be real, I thought. I am a scholar. I've spent my life serving Allah. But the light showed me that my service had often been for recognition, not for devotion. It was a truth too painful to bear, and I cried out, "Ya Allah, forgive me!" The scene shifted, and I was taken to what I can only describe as a place of separation. Neither the torment of Jahannam nor the bliss of Jannah. It was as if I was being shown the reality of my soul's condition. I saw faces of people I had known, some radiant with peace, others shadowed by regret. I woke up in a hospital bed, gasping for air, with Amina clutching my hand. "You're alive!" she sobbed. But I wasn't the same man. The days after my near-death experience were filled with turmoil. On the surface, I was the same scholar, but inside, I was a storm of doubt and confusion. I shared my experience with Yusuf, my mentor, hoping he could provide clarity. But his reaction was dismissive. "The afterlife is beyond our comprehension, Ibrahim. Perhaps you had a vivid dream," he said, avoiding my gaze. Khalid, my childhood friend, was more receptive. "Maybe Allah is showing you something deeper, something we've overlooked," he suggested. But the more I shared, the more I faced resistance. My colleagues at the madrasa began to whisper behind my back. Omar, a younger scholar, openly challenged me. "Be careful, Ibrahim. These stories can mislead the faithful. We rely on scripture, not visions." Even at home, Amina was worried. "Ibrahim, you've always been so strong in your faith. Why are you doubting now?" she asked, tears in her eyes. I didn't know how to answer her. All I knew was that the experience had changed me. The certainty I once had was gone, replaced by a humbling realization. I had focused so much on outward rituals that I had neglected the inward journey of truly knowing Allah. The days turned into weeks, and my inner struggle deepened. I tried to return to my usual routines, teaching at the madrasa, attending community events, but everything felt hollow. It was as if my near-death experience had stripped away a veil, and I couldn't unsee the truth. One evening, I decided to seek solace at a quiet mosque on the outskirts of the city, far from the familiar faces of my usual congregation. The atmosphere was serene, with only a handful of worshippers. As I sat in contemplation after Isha prayers, an elderly man approached me. "You look troubled, my son," he said, his voice warm and steady. I hesitated, but then shared a brief version of my experience, omitting the more personal details. His expression didn't change, but his words surprised me. "What you saw was a mercy. Few are given the chance to see themselves as they truly are." I stared at him, shocked. "But why would Allah show me this?" I thought I was living a life of faith. He smiled gently. Because faith is not just in actions, but in surrender. And surrender is the hardest thing for those who think they already have it. His words struck a deep chord. Before I could respond, the man stood and walked away. I sat in stunned silence, replaying his words. Faith is in surrender, I whispered to myself. That night, I prayed with a desperation I hadn't felt in years. I asked for guidance, for clarity, for understanding. And as I drifted into sleep, I had a dream that would reshape my journey. In the dream, I was standing in a vast desert under a blazing sun. Before me stood two paths. One was wide and crowded with people, all walking confidently in the same direction. The other was narrow and desolate, with only a faint light guiding its way. A voice, calm and firm, spoke. The wide path is easy, but it leads to nothing. The narrow path is hard, but it leads to me. I turned toward the narrow path and began to walk. The heat was intense, and each step felt heavier than the last. I looked back at the wide path, where people seemed carefree and joyful. For a moment I hesitated, wanting to join them. But then I saw the faint light ahead, and something within me urged me forward. I woke with a start, my heart pounding. The dream was more than a vision. It was a revelation. The wide path was the life I had been leading, a life of outward devotion but inner complacency. The narrow path was the harder journey of true surrender, one that required me to face my fears, my pride, and my doubts. For the first time since my near-death experience, I felt a sense of clarity. The road ahead would not be easy, but it was the road I had to take. The revelation from my dream gave me a sense of direction, but walking the narrow path was harder than I had imagined. The first challenge came when I tried to share my experience with Amina. That morning, as she set breakfast on the table, I hesitated, unsure of how to begin. Finally, I said, "Amina, I need to tell you about something that happened during my time in the hospital." She paused, her hand hovering over the teapot. "What is it, Ibrahim?" she asked, concern etched on her face. I recounted my dream, carefully choosing my words to avoid overwhelming her. When I finished, she looked at me for a long moment before saying, "Ibrahim, I don't doubt your sincerity, but these dreams, they frighten me. What if they're a test? What if you're being led astray?" Her words cut deep, but I couldn't blame her. Amina had always relied on the stability of my faith as a foundation for our family. Now, she was grappling with the idea that the man she had always seen as steadfast was questioning his understanding of the very faith that had defined our lives. "I don't think this is leading me astray," I replied gently. "I believe it's calling me to something deeper. But I need your support, Amina. I can't walk this path alone." She nodded reluctantly, but the worry in her eyes didn't fade. At the madrasa, the tension was even more palpable. I decided to share the essence of my dream during one of our study sessions, hoping it would inspire reflection. "We often speak of the wide and narrow paths," I began, addressing the students seated before me. "But do we truly understand what it means to walk the narrow path? It is not just about avoiding sin. It is about surrendering completely to Allah's will, even when it challenges everything we hold dear." Omar, my outspoken colleague, didn't wait to challenge me. "Are you suggesting that we, who dedicate our lives to Allah, are not already on the narrow path?" His words were laced with sarcasm, but I could see the genuine confusion in the students' faces. I took a deep breath. "I'm saying that walking the narrow path isn't about what we do outwardly. It's about the state of our hearts. Are we truly humble before Allah? Or do we take pride in our deeds and knowledge?" A murmur spread through the room. Some students nodded thoughtfully, while others whispered among themselves. Omar shook his head, his expression one of frustration. After the session, Yusuf, my mentor, called me aside. "Ibrahim," he said, his tone measured, "you are walking a dangerous line. These ideas could confuse the students." "With respect, Yusuf," I replied, "shouldn't we be challenging them to think deeper about their faith?" "Faith is not about doubt," he countered. "It is about certainty. Certainty in Allah," I said, "not in ourselves." Yusuf's expression softened, but he didn't respond. At home, my sister Fatima visited unexpectedly. She had heard from the community about my recent lectures and wanted to address the rumors. "Ibrahim," she began, "what is going on? People are saying you're questioning the teachings." "I'm not questioning the teachings," I said firmly. "I'm questioning how we live them." Fatima sighed, her frustration evident. You've always been the one we looked up to. Don't lose that, Ibrahim. The community needs you to stay strong. Her words stung, but I realized she was speaking out of love. Fatima, staying strong doesn't mean staying the same. Sometimes we have to grow, even if it's uncomfortable. She didn't seem convinced, but she hugged me before leaving. As the days passed, the reactions from those around me became a test of my resolve. Amina tried her best to support me, but I could sense her unease. At the madrasa, the whispers grew louder, and even some students seemed wary of me. But for every skeptic, there was someone like Zara, who came to me privately to express how my words had made her reflect on her own faith. These moments reminded me why I was walking the narrow path. It wasn't for validation from others, it was for the truth. Despite the tension surrounding me, I felt a quiet sense of purpose. Yet, the challenges only deepened as the days passed, forcing me to confront both external resistance and my own inner doubts. One morning, while preparing for a class at the madrasa, I received an unexpected message. It was from Rashid, an old friend who had studied with me years ago, but had since distanced himself from traditional teachings. His message was simple. I heard about your vision. We need to talk. There's more to the truth than you realize. The message unsettled me. Rashid had always been controversial, questioning interpretations of Islam that most scholars deemed sacrosanct. Engaging with him felt like stepping into dangerous territory. But something about his words intrigued me, as if he held a piece of the puzzle I was missing. We met that evening at a quiet cafe. Rashid was the same, sharp-eyed and intense, with a way of cutting straight to the heart of a matter. Ibrahim, he said after exchanging pleasantries, what you're experiencing isn't unique. Many scholars have had moments like this where the veil is lifted, but few are brave enough to follow where it leads. Where does it lead? I asked, leaning forward. To a deeper understanding of Allah, he replied, one that doesn't rely on rituals or the approval of others, but on true submission. But be warned, this path will cost you, your reputation, your relationships, even your sense of certainty. His words stirred something in me, a mix of fear and curiosity. But isn't submission about certainty? I countered. No, Rashid said, his voice firm. It's about trust, trusting Allah even when you don't have all the answers. His perspective was unsettling, but it also resonated with the dreams and feelings I had been grappling with. As we parted, he left me with a parting thought. The question isn't whether you'll walk the path, Ibrahim. It's whether you'll walk it alone. At home, Amina's struggle became more apparent. She had always been my strongest supporter, but now she seemed distant, her silence speaking volumes. One evening, as I tried to reassure her, she finally spoke. Ibrahim, I'm trying to understand, but I feel like I'm losing you. The man I married was confident, steadfast. Now, you're different. I took her hands in mine. I am different, Amina, but it doesn't mean I love you or the children any less. I'm just trying to be honest, with myself and with Allah. She nodded, but her tears betrayed her doubts. The madrasa posed its own challenges. Zara, the bright student who had confided in me earlier, became a focal point of controversy. Some of my colleagues accused her of being overly influenced by my teachings, claiming she was questioning traditional doctrines. One afternoon, she came to me in tears. Ustad, they're saying I've lost my way because I asked questions in class. Am I wrong to want to understand more deeply? Her pain struck a chord. You are not wrong, Zara, I said firmly. Faith is a journey, and asking questions is part of that journey. Never let anyone make you feel ashamed for seeking truth. But her situation highlighted the risks I faced. My teachings were not only affecting me, but also those who looked up to me. The turning point came during a Friday sermon at the mosque. I was invited to speak, and I chose a topic that had been weighing heavily on my heart: the difference between performing faith and living it. As I spoke, I saw a range of reactions. Some nodded in agreement, while others exchanged skeptical glances. When I finished, an elder approached me. Ibrahim, he said, his tone measured but stern, your words are thought-provoking, but they tread dangerous ground. Be careful not to lead others into confusion. I thanked him, but his warning lingered in my mind. Was I truly guiding people closer to Allah, or was I sowing discord? The challenges multiplied, each one testing my resolve. Amina's fears, Rashid's cryptic guidance, Zara's struggles, and the community's skepticism all converged, forcing me to confront the cost of my journey. Yet through it all, I felt a growing conviction that the narrow path, however difficult, was the only path worth walking. As the weeks passed, the emotional toll of this journey began to weigh heavily on me. Each day I found myself pulled between two worlds, the life I once knew and the one I was beginning to understand. The strain began to show in my relationships, particularly with Amina. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Amina and I sat in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. Finally, she broke the silence. "Ibrahim, I don't know how much longer I can pretend everything is fine. I feel like I'm living with a stranger. You're not the man I married. I miss the old you, the confident, assured scholar who knew exactly what he believed. This man who questions everything is..." She trailed off, unable to find the words. I could hear the pain in her voice. It was as though she was mourning the loss of the man I had been. "Amina, I'm still here. But I've changed, yes. And I'm asking you to walk this path with me. You've always been the most important part of my life. I need your support more than ever." Her eyes filled with tears. "But what if this journey changes you in ways I can't follow? What if I lose you in the process?" I took her hands in mine, my heart heavy. "You haven't lost me, Amina. But I need you to understand, I'm not doing this for myself alone. I'm doing this to be closer to Allah. And if I don't follow this path, I will lose the very thing that gives my life meaning." She pulled her hands away gently, a sob escaping her. "I just want to know you're safe. I want to know that we're safe. I don't know if I can live with this uncertainty." Her words stung, but they were born out of love and fear. I understood that, but it didn't make it any easier. At the madrasa, things began to spiral. Some students who had once admired me began avoiding me. The whispers grew louder, and some of my colleagues started treating me with subtle disdain. A few of them, like Omar, were openly critical. "Do you really think you're helping anyone by teaching these ideas?" he said one afternoon after class. "You're confusing people, Ibrahim. You're challenging the foundation of everything we've built here." I looked at him, trying to remain calm. "Omar, I'm not challenging our faith. I'm challenging how we've understood it. We can't continue to hold on to outdated notions if they don't bring us closer to Allah. This isn't about me, it's about truth." "Truth?" he sneered. "You've lost your way. We've dedicated our lives to this knowledge, and now you're telling us it's all wrong?" His words cut deep, and I struggled to hold my ground. But then I saw the confused faces of my students, and I realized that the cracks were already beginning to show. The very foundation of my life, the madrasa, my reputation and my relationships, was at risk of crumbling. Later that night, I found myself alone in the mosque, my thoughts a jumble of doubt and frustration. I had tried to walk the path of truth, but at what cost? Was the tension with Amina worth it? Was I leading my students astray, or was I truly bringing them closer to Allah? In the stillness of the mosque, I closed my eyes and prayed with an intensity I hadn't felt in years. "Oh Allah, guide me. Show me the way forward. I feel lost. I don't want to be a cause of division. I only want to follow the path you've set for me. Please, give me clarity." As I opened my eyes, I noticed a figure standing in the doorway. It was Yusuf, my mentor. "Ibrahim," he said softly, stepping forward. "I've been thinking about our conversation earlier, and I realize now that I may have been too harsh." "Yusuf," I replied, my voice heavy with exhaustion, "I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Everything is falling apart." He sat beside me, his expression softening. "You are not the first to question. You are not the first to struggle. But remember, Ibrahim, what you are seeking is not certainty, but peace. Peace with Allah. And sometimes peace comes after the storm." His words didn't solve everything, but they offered a glimmer of hope. Perhaps I was on the right path, even if the road was long and fraught with challenges. The next day, I received a letter from Zara, one of my most dedicated students. She wrote, "Ustad Ibrahim, I want to thank you for opening my eyes. I never realized how much I was holding on to a faith that was more about appearances than true submission. You have helped me see that I need to surrender to Allah, not just in my actions, but in my heart. Please don't let the doubts of others stop you from sharing this truth. You are helping more people than you realize." Reading her letter filled me with a renewed sense of purpose. Even in the midst of my own turmoil, I had impacted someone's life. Maybe that was enough. Maybe for the first time I was beginning to walk the path of truth, despite the sacrifices it demanded. As the weeks turned into months, the tension in my life continued to escalate. I could feel the weight of my choices pressing down on me, and yet something deeper was calling me forward. My journey of spiritual awakening was no longer a quiet internal struggle. It had become a public confrontation, and with each passing day, the stakes grew higher. The phone call came unexpectedly. It was from Rashid. "Ibrahim, you need to meet me. Something has happened. It's about the visions you've been having." His voice was laced with urgency. I immediately agreed to meet him that evening at the same cafe. When I arrived, Rashid was waiting, his face pale and his hands trembling. "I've been studying your case," he began, "and I believe what you're experiencing is more than just personal revelation. There are forces at play that you don't understand. What you've seen, it's connected to something much larger." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean? Forces at play? Rashid, you're scaring me." He looked around cautiously, as if worried someone might be listening. "I've come across a manuscript, a very old manuscript, that talks about visions like yours. It's not just about you, Ibrahim. This is a pattern. Others have had similar experiences throughout history, and many of them are part of a larger divine plan." My heart raced. The visions, the dreams, the sense of being drawn into something greater than myself. Was this what Rashid was referring to? "What is this manuscript?" "It's called the Book of Truth," Rashid whispered. "It's said to contain insights into the nature of Allah's will, the truth behind life, death, and the afterlife. But it's forbidden. Anyone who's ever sought it has either disappeared or been silenced." I leaned in closer. "Why are you telling me this?" Rashid paused before answering. "Because I think you're ready, Ibrahim. You're already on the edge of something monumental, but this path could cost you more than you've already lost." The weight of his words hung in the air, and I felt a deep pull in my chest. Was I truly prepared for whatever lay ahead? As I left the cafe, my mind was in turmoil. What was Rashid hinting at? The idea of a hidden truth that transcended everything I had been taught was both exhilarating and terrifying. For so long, I had believed that my path was one of intellectual growth and spiritual understanding. But now it seemed there were forces at play far beyond my comprehension. The next day, as I sat in my study, pondering Rashid's words, a new wave of doubt washed over me. I thought about Amina. The growing distance between us had been painful, and now, with this new revelation, I wondered if I was asking too much of her. Was it fair to pull her into this uncertainty? I was jolted from my thoughts when the door to my study opened. It was Amina, her eyes swollen from hours of silent crying. "Ibrahim," she said softly, stepping inside. "I've been talking to my sister. She's worried about you, about us. She thinks we should get help, maybe talk to someone, a counselor." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Amina, I know this isn't easy for you, but this isn't something I can walk away from. I've been called to something greater than myself." Her face hardened. "I understand, but I need to know if we still have a future together. If this journey of yours is going to continue pulling you away from me, away from us, then I don't know how much more I can take." Her words felt like a dagger to my heart. I had already lost so much. Was my quest for truth going to tear my family apart? Later that week, I met with Yusuf again, hoping for some clarity. We sat in his office, and I explained everything. Rashid's cryptic words, the manuscript, and the emotional turmoil I was experiencing. Yusuf listened intently, then leaned back in his chair. "Ibrahim," he said quietly, "what you're experiencing is not just a spiritual awakening. It's a trial. Allah is testing you, not just your faith, but your commitment to the truth. Your journey is about more than your personal redemption. It is about how your transformation will affect those around you." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words. "But what if I lose everything in the process? My marriage, my students, my reputation. How much more am I supposed to sacrifice?" Yusuf looked at me with a somber expression. "Sometimes, Ibrahim, the path of truth requires great sacrifice. But remember, Allah does not ask you to sacrifice in vain. Every step you take, no matter how painful, brings you closer to the light. But you must be willing to walk the path, no matter the cost." As I left his office, I felt both comforted and unsettled. Yusuf's words gave me a sense of direction, but they also made the stakes clearer than ever. I was on the brink of something that could change not only my life, but the lives of everyone around me. The tension between Amina and me reached a breaking point just days later. I walked into our home to find her sitting with her parents, her eyes filled with distress. When she saw me, she didn't speak, but the look on her face said everything. "Amina," I said, my voice shaking, "please, talk to me." Her parents exchanged uneasy glances, and her father, ever the stoic figure, stood up and spoke. "Ibrahim, it's clear that you're on a different path now, but you must understand, we are not ready for this. Your wife is not ready for this. We need you to come back to the family, to the community. This journey you're on is leading you away from everything we hold dear." His words felt like a punch to the gut. The choice was becoming more and more clear. I had to choose between my past, the people I loved, the life I had, and the truth I was now discovering. The following weeks became a blur of heightened emotions and conflicting allegiances. My life, once so neatly compartmentalized between my work, my family, and my faith, now seemed like an unraveling thread, each pull making the fabric of my existence stretch further than I ever imagined possible. Amina and I found ourselves at odds more often than not. There were moments when I thought we might be able to rebuild the bridges we had burned, but just as quickly, we'd slip back into silence. She had retreated inward, no longer engaging in the conversations we once shared. It felt as though the distance between us had become an impassable chasm. One evening, she came to me with a question that had been weighing on her heart. "Ibrahim," she said quietly, "do you believe there's hope for us? Can we ever go back to how we were before?" The question hit me harder than I expected. How could I promise her something I wasn't sure of myself? I knew that my transformation was not just an intellectual shift, but a profound spiritual awakening. Yet the cost was high, and I was unsure whether I could reclaim what I had once known. "I don't know," I replied, my voice heavy with uncertainty. "I want to believe that we can find a way back, but I can't ignore the path I'm on now. I can't pretend it doesn't exist, and I can't stop walking it." Her face fell, and I could see the tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know who you are anymore, Ibrahim. I miss the man I married, the man who used to hold my hand and reassure me that everything would be okay. Now, I don't even know how to reach you." Her words pierced through me, but I couldn't find a way to ease her pain. The path I was walking had begun to feel like a solitary one, and the more I moved forward, the more I seemed to drift away from those I loved. Meanwhile, at the madrasa, things were beginning to change. The tension that had been brewing for so long was starting to spill over. Some of my students, particularly those who had once admired my lectures and ideas, were beginning to show their support. Zara, the student who had written me the letter earlier, approached me after class one day. "Ustad Ibrahim, I just want you to know that I'm grateful for everything you've taught me," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "You've opened my eyes to a truth I never knew. The way we approach our faith matters. It's not enough to just go through the motions. I want to learn more. Please, don't stop." Her words were a balm to my wounded spirit. In that moment, I felt like I wasn't alone, like the journey I was on was beginning to touch others, even if it was in subtle, quiet ways. But the truth was, it wasn't just about the students. It was about something much larger, a growing sense of purpose that I could not ignore. Despite this support, the resistance from my colleagues, especially Omar, continued to grow. After one particularly heated debate in the faculty room, where I shared my belief that our understanding of faith should evolve to address the complexities of modern life, Omar confronted me directly. "You've become a liability. Ibrahim," he said, his voice cold and dismissive. "You're distorting the very essence of what we've been taught. These new ideas you're pushing, they will lead to nothing but confusion. You're pulling people away from the truth." I felt the sting of his words, but didn't back down. "Omar, I'm not pulling anyone away. I'm trying to help people see beyond the surface, to deepen their connection to Allah. If that's a threat to you, then perhaps we've been teaching the wrong things all along." The confrontation left me drained, but in some ways it felt necessary. There were times when I questioned whether my ideas were truly revolutionary or just a temporary delusion. But moments like these reminded me that I wasn't merely seeking validation from those around me. I was on a path that required courage, even if it meant losing the respect of those I once considered peers. As I spent more time reflecting on my journey, something strange began to happen. More and more people I had never expected, started coming to me with their own stories of spiritual disillusionment. Some were former students, others were members of the community who had been silently struggling with their faith. They had questions, doubts, and fears, and in many ways they saw my journey as a reflection of their own. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult meeting with Amina, I received a message from a former friend, Khalid, who I hadn't spoken to in years. He was a devout man, deeply involved in community service, but our paths had diverged after I began questioning traditional teachings. His message read, "Ibrahim, I've heard about your struggles, and I can't help but feel compelled to reach out. I've been on my own journey of questioning lately, and I think we need to talk. I don't know where this path will lead, but I'm ready to explore it with you. Let me know when you're free." Khalid's message felt like a lifeline. His willingness to engage with me despite the risks of being associated with someone like me, someone seen as questioning sacred truths, was a powerful reminder that I was not alone. And perhaps, just perhaps, there were others who were ready to listen and walk this path with me, despite the consequences. As the days went by, I couldn't help but feel the growing weight of the choices I had made. The further I walked down this road, the more I realized that it was leading me away from the life I had known, but also towards something far greater, something I couldn't yet fully comprehend. Every step, every revelation, every challenge was shaping me into someone new. I was no longer just a scholar. I was a seeker, someone who had come face to face with the divine and found that the truth was more complex, more beautiful, and more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. The day of the annual community gathering arrived, and it felt as though every piece of my life was converging at that moment. The event, a celebration of our faith and traditions, was always a time of unity and joy. But this year, there was a palpable tension in the air, one that I could not ignore. I knew that I had already crossed a line. My growing doubts, my changed perspectives, and my open questioning of the traditions I had once so firmly held had set me on a path of isolation. Amina and I were barely speaking anymore, and despite the small support I had found among some students and even a few colleagues, I felt an overwhelming sense of estrangement. The people who had once embraced me were now avoiding me, and the ones who had started to notice the change in me seemed hesitant to follow. As I stood among the crowd at the gathering, I could see Omar watching me from across the room. His gaze was sharp, his eyes filled with a mixture of disappointment and contempt. I knew that this was the moment, the point at which the rift between us would become impossible to ignore. Later that evening, as I found a quiet corner to gather my thoughts, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to find Rashid, his face drawn and anxious. "Ibrahim, you have to be careful," Rashid said, his voice low. "You're about to make a choice that could change everything. The manuscript I told you about, the one I've been studying, it's not just a collection of ancient wisdom. It's dangerous. People who have sought its truth in the past haven't always survived the journey." I felt the familiar weight of dread settle over me. "What do you mean by dangerous, Rashid? This truth, it's supposed to bring us closer to Allah. Why would something that's supposed to bring clarity be dangerous?" Rashid's eyes flickered with fear. "Because it's not just knowledge, Ibrahim. It's power, real power. It has the ability to unravel everything. It's not just about understanding the divine, it's about understanding the very fabric of existence. And once you see that, once you understand the depths of it, there's no going back." I stared at him, trying to absorb what he was saying. "So you think I'm in danger?" Rashid didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer and lowered his voice. "I think you've already started walking down a path you may not be able to turn back from. But the real question is, are you ready to face what lies ahead?" As I walked away from Rashid, his words echoed in my mind. Was I ready? Had I already given too much of myself to this journey to turn back now? I knew that if I continued down this path, there would be no easy return. My marriage with Amina would never be the same. My place in the community would be shattered. Even the respect I had earned as a scholar might vanish in an instant. But the deeper I delved into my own spiritual exploration, the more I felt an undeniable pull forward. It was then that I received a phone call that would change everything. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar but urgent. "Is this Dr. Ibrahim?" "Yes, this is Ibrahim," I replied, my heart racing. "I'm calling on behalf of your wife's family. There's been an incident. You need to come quickly." Panic surged through me as I asked for more details. "What happened? Is Amina okay?" The voice hesitated before replying. "She's been taken to the hospital. She's in critical condition." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. Amina, my wife, the woman I had promised to love and protect. How could this be happening? I rushed out of the gathering, my mind clouded with fear, my heart thundering in my chest. At the hospital, I was met by Amina's parents. Her mother was in a state of shock, clinging to her husband for support. Her father, the usually stoic man, was pacing nervously, his face drawn and pale. "What happened to her?" I demanded, trying to steady my voice. Her father met my eyes with a grim expression. "She collapsed suddenly. The doctors are still trying to understand what caused it. They're doing everything they can, but..." His voice trailed off. I felt an icy hand grip my chest. I couldn't breathe. Was this some kind of sign? Was I being punished for the choices I had made? My thoughts spiraled out of control, but there was no time to dwell on that now. Amina needed me, and I would do whatever it took to make sure she was okay. I was allowed to see her briefly. When I entered her room, I found her lying unconscious, pale and still. The machines beeped rhythmically, monitoring her vitals. I stood there, feeling helpless and lost, wondering how we had arrived at this moment. My transformation had come at such a cost. Was it worth it? Could I continue to pursue this path if it meant losing everything I held dear? Amina's mother sat next to me, her voice trembling. "Ibrahim, what is happening to her? What's happening to us? We don't recognize the man we once knew, and now our daughter." I squeezed my eyes shut, the weight of her words crashing down on me. Was this all my fault? Had my spiritual journey led us here? It was in that moment that I knew what I had to do. The choice before me was no longer just about the truth I sought. It was about everything I had left to lose. Could I still move forward? Could I sacrifice my family, my wife, and my peace of mind for the pursuit of truth? Or was this a divine sign that I needed to stop? The path I had chosen was now inextricably linked with a real, tangible cost. It was a crossroads unlike any I had faced before, and the consequences of my next step would ripple through every part of my life. The days following Amina's hospitalization were a blur of fear and self-doubt. I spent every waking moment at her side, willing her to wake up, willing myself to be the man I had once been, the man she had married, the man who was certain of his faith and his purpose. Yet as I sat there in the sterile, quiet room, the haunting truth of my situation weighed heavily on me. My journey, my questioning, had led me to this point. A point where I was at war with myself, torn between the man I had been and the man I was becoming. In the quiet moments when I was alone, I found myself grappling with the growing realization that I couldn't have both. I couldn't continue on the path of spiritual awakening that was drawing me closer to an understanding of divine truths if it meant losing Amina, losing my place in the world, and losing everything that had once felt so certain. Was the truth worth the sacrifice? Was it worth the price that had already been paid, and the price that still loomed ahead? One evening, as I sat at Amina's bedside, I heard a soft knock on the door. It was her mother. She entered the room, her face lined with concern, but something in her eyes told me that she had made a decision that would either bring us closer or drive the final wedge between us. "Ibrahim, we need to talk," she said, her voice calm but firm. "About Amina, about you, about all of this." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. It had been coming, the conversation that I had been dreading. I had expected it to be Amina herself, but instead it was her mother, the one person who had always been my ally. I felt my throat tighten as she took a seat beside me. "You know, Ibrahim, I've watched you change. I've seen the light in your eyes grow brighter, but I've also seen the distance between you and Amina grow wider. And I've been afraid to say anything because I wanted to believe this was just a phase, that you were going through something temporary. She paused, her gaze drifting to Amina, who still lay unconscious. But this isn't just a phase, is it? I shook my head, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what it is anymore. I don't know if I'm on the right path, but I can't turn back. I can't pretend like everything is the same. Her eyes softened, but there was a deep sadness in her expression. I know you're searching for something, Ibrahim. I know you want to understand, to be closer to Allah. But don't you see? You're hurting her. You're hurting your family, and in doing so, you're hurting yourself. The man I knew, the man who stood beside us with unwavering faith, would never have let go of those who loved him. You've already chosen a path that will leave us behind. Is it worth it? Her words hit me like a cold wave. Was it worth it? Was the knowledge I was seeking worth the destruction it was causing? Amina was in the hospital, my family was falling apart, and the community I had spent my life building was slipping through my fingers. Was this the cost of enlightenment? Just as I began to process her words, a thought struck me like a bolt of lightning. I had been so consumed with my quest for truth that I had failed to see the toll it was taking on those around me. The further I walked down this path, the more isolated I became. Yes, I had found new insights, new perspectives on faith, on life, on the afterlife, but had I lost the most important thing in the process? I turned to Amina's mother, my heart filled with emotion. I don't know if I can stop, even if I wanted to, I confessed. The journey I'm on, it's not just about me anymore. I can feel it in my soul, but I don't know what to do. I can't lose you. I can't lose Amina, but I can't pretend either. She looked at me with a mixture of sorrow and understanding. Then maybe, Ibrahim, it's not about choosing one path over the other. Maybe you need to find a way to balance what you've discovered with who you were, who you still are. You don't have to lose everything to find your truth. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. Was it possible to reconcile my newfound beliefs with the life I had once known? Could I continue my spiritual journey without sacrificing the love I had for my wife and the community that had raised me? The next morning, as I sat in the hospital waiting room, I felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. It was time to make a choice. I didn't need to abandon everything I had known, but I also couldn't ignore the spiritual truths I had encountered. The question now wasn't whether the journey was worth it. It was how to walk the path in a way that didn't destroy the people I loved. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. It would take work, patience, and humility. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. I could move forward. I could keep my faith, but in a way that didn't demand everything from me. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way to bring Amina back to me, not by pretending to be someone I wasn't, but by showing her who I was becoming. As the days passed in the hospital, something within me shifted. It was as if the weight of my spiritual journey, the burdens of my doubts and my quest for truth had been lifted, just enough to allow clarity to return. The urgency that had once driven me to search for deeper meaning was now tempered by a realization. Truth, in its purest form, wasn't meant to isolate me from the people I loved. It wasn't about choosing between the two paths, but about integrating what I had learned into the life I had. Amina's condition remained critical, but there were signs of hope. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, though they didn't want to raise our expectations. I was sitting beside her, my hand gently holding hers, when I felt it, the sudden warmth of her fingers responding to my touch. It was subtle, but it was enough to fill me with a sense of peace I had not known in weeks. Amina opened her eyes slowly, as though coming out of a deep sleep. Her gaze met mine, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I saw something familiar, something that felt like the woman I had married. She tried to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. Ibrahim. I leaned in closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face, my heart pounding. Amina, you're awake. You're going to be all right. Tears filled her eyes and she struggled to sit up. What happened? I remember you were distant, and I was so scared. I squeezed her hand tighter, afraid that if I let go, the fragile thread that connected us would snap. I know, Amina. I know. I was lost in something I couldn't explain. But I've come to understand. I've come to see that I was wrong." Her eyes searched mine, still filled with confusion and a deep sadness. "Ibrahim, what do you mean you were wrong?" I could feel the truth rising in me, a truth that had become clear in the solitude of my own heart. The quest for knowledge and spiritual awakening had led me to a place I had never expected, one of reckoning. I had gained insights, visions, and a sense of divine understanding, but in doing so, I had strayed too far from the people I loved. I had lost my way, believing that the truth could only be found in isolation, in rejecting the life I had. I had failed to see that true wisdom was in bringing light into the world, not retreating from it. I was searching for something beyond myself, Amina, I began, my voice thick with emotion. I thought that if I could understand everything, if I could connect with the divine in a deeper way, I would find peace. But what I didn't understand was that peace isn't just something you find within. It's something that connects us. It's in the love we share, the people we care for, and the faith we hold together. Tears welled in her eyes as she pulled me closer, her voice shaky. "Ibrahim, I don't understand everything that's happened, but I do know that I need you. I need you here with me. You're not just a scholar or a seeker. You're my husband, and I've missed you." I kissed her forehead, overwhelmed with gratitude. In that moment, the journey of self-discovery that had once seemed so separate from the life I had with Amina came crashing together. The journey wasn't about abandoning everything. It was about understanding how to embrace the life I had and the people who loved me, while still holding on to the spiritual truths that had been revealed to me. It wasn't long before I realized that this was not just a reconciliation with Amina. It was a reconciliation with myself. The decisions I had been grappling with weren't just about my path. They were about how that path affected those around me. The revelations I had experienced during my near-death journey had opened my eyes, but it was the love of my wife, my family, and my community that had shown me the way forward. As I spent the following weeks helping Amina recover, I began to reconnect with the world I had once felt distanced from. I found new ways to incorporate my spiritual insights into my everyday life, teaching with a renewed sense of compassion, approaching my family with humility, and offering myself to my community in a way that honored both my journey and the people I loved. But the journey wasn't over. I knew that the path I had walked would forever shape me. There would always be challenges, doubts, and moments of crisis. But now I understood that these were not signs of failure. They were opportunities for growth. The journey wasn't a straight line, and it wasn't meant to be. It was a series of steps, each one bringing me closer to a truth that was both vast and deeply personal. The days following Amina's recovery were a delicate dance between healing and change. I had walked away from the brink of spiritual oblivion, and now, standing on the other side, I felt reborn. Not in the sense of abandoning my old self, but in the sense of integrating everything I had learned and experienced. I had found a deeper understanding of faith, but more importantly, I had rediscovered love. Love for my wife, love for my family, and love for the community that had once been my anchor. One evening, after a quiet dinner with Amina and her family, I found myself walking alone in the garden outside our home. The night air was crisp, and the stars shone brightly above, as if the universe itself was offering me a moment of peace. I thought back to the days when I had been lost in my spiritual search, questioning everything, doubting everything, even my own worth. It seemed so far away now. My vision had been blurred, my heart heavy with the burden of wanting answers, wanting certainty. But in the silence of that garden, I realized something profound. The answers I had sought were never far from me. They were in the love and faith that I had once taken for granted. As I stood there, reflecting on all that had happened, a sudden warmth filled me, an undeniable sense of divine presence, a peace that surpassed all understanding. I had felt it before, in moments of clarity, but now it was different. It was as though I was being enveloped in grace, a grace that came not from knowledge alone, but from love, unconditional, forgiving love. And in that moment, I understood. I had been seeking the truth for so long, believing that knowledge and enlightenment were the keys to salvation. But what I hadn't realized was that true salvation wasn't found in the head. It was found in the heart. It was in the relationships we nurture, the sacrifices we make for others, the moments of kindness and compassion that define who we truly are. I had been searching for the divine in the wrong places, when all along, the divine had been present in my life, in the faces of the people who loved me, in the moments of connection, and in the quiet whispers of my own soul. I closed my eyes, allowing myself to feel the weight of everything I had experienced, every revelation, every challenge. The vision I had had during my near-death experience, the image of the light, the sense of overwhelming love, was now clearer than ever. That love was not something distant, something abstract. It was here, in this world, in the people who walked beside me. My journey had not been about finding a new path, but about rediscovering the path I had been walking all along. When I opened my eyes, I felt a deep sense of peace. It was the peace of acceptance, the peace of knowing that I didn't need to have all the answers. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, least of all myself. I had found my way back, not just to Amina, but to myself. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. I made my way back inside, where Amina was sitting, waiting for me. She looked up as I entered, her face soft with love. Without a word, I went to her, taking her hands in mine. "Amina," I began, my voice thick with emotion. "I've been lost for so long. I've been searching for something that I thought would bring me peace, but what I've realized is that peace was always here, with you, with us, in our family. I've been blind to that." Tears welled in her eyes as she reached for me. "Ibrahim, I don't know what happened to you, but I can feel that you've changed, and I love you no matter what." I pulled her close, my heart full. For the first time in my life, I wasn't seeking validation from the outside world. I wasn't worried about whether I had all the answers. I knew I would continue to grow, to learn, and to seek. But now, I understood that I didn't have to do it alone. I didn't have to abandon the life I had. In fact, it was in the life I had, my marriage, my family, my community, that I would find the fullest expression of the truths I had discovered. The days that followed were filled with a new sense of purpose. Amina and I worked together to rebuild what had been strained during my spiritual search. We spoke openly, sharing our fears, our hopes, and our dreams. We took steps to heal not just the wounds of the past, but to nurture a deeper connection, one grounded in both love and faith. But the most significant change was in my approach to life. I resumed my work as a scholar, but now my studies were no longer an escape or a quest for dominance over knowledge. They were a way to understand the divine in the world around me, a way to help others find peace and clarity in their own lives. I visited the community mosque again, not out of obligation, but out of a desire to reconnect, to share what I had learned, to listen, and to grow with them. I realized that my journey wasn't just about seeking answers for myself. It was about sharing what I had discovered with others, offering them the same light and grace that had been shown to me. Ibrahim's journey was one of transformation, not just from disbelief to faith, but from isolation to connection. It was a journey of rediscovery, of finding peace not in the answers, but in the love and relationships that had always been a part of him. His story is a reminder that no matter how lost we may feel, we are never truly alone. The path to spiritual fulfillment isn't just about seeking knowledge, it's about embracing the love and grace that exists within us all. If Ibrahim's journey has resonated with you, I invite you to reflect on your own beliefs and experiences. Have you ever found yourself lost, searching for answers? What would it mean for you to embrace the love and community around you as part of your own spiritual journey? If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to subscribe, share this video with those who might benefit from it, and leave a comment telling us where you're from and what your journey looks like. Remember, the search for truth is a lifelong process, and you don't have to walk it alone.